My boss screamed at me for 12 straight minutes because I answered a client email at 5:05 p.m. Not 5 a.m., not midnight, 5:05 in the afternoon, 5 minutes after the end of my scheduled shift. When he finally stopped, red-faced, doors slightly open, I'm pretty sure 3 people in the hallway heard everything. He pointed at me and said, "If you ever work a single minute of unapproved overtime again, you are done. Clock out at 5. I don't care what's happening. Not my problem. Not your job anymore. 5 o'clock, you're out the door." I looked at him, and I said, "Understood. I'll follow that rule exactly." Now, most people in that chair would have said that to calm him down and then gone right back to doing their job like a reasonable professional. I'm not most people. The next afternoon, 5:01 p.m., our largest shipping contract hit a catastrophic operational crisis. Every single second was critical. Millions of dollars were actively on fire. I looked at my monitor. I looked at the clock. I picked up my bag. I shut my laptop. I said goodnight to nobody in particular. And I walked out. I am young, and this is what happens when you make a rule you didn't think through. At the time this happened, I was the senior logistics coordinator at a mid-sized freight and shipping company. About 80 employees, regional operation. We handled contracts for some pretty significant clients in the manufacturing and retail space. I'd been there for 4 years. Good at my job. Actually great at my job. If I'm being honest, I had built relationships with our top clients that took years to develop, and several of them had explicitly told my direct supervisor that they prefer to work with me specifically. My direct supervisor was a man I'll call Dennis. Dennis was the regional operations manager, one rung above me, one rung below the actual company owner who ran things out of a separate office across town and trusted his managers to handle day-to-day operations. Dennis had been in his role for about 2 years before this story happened. He was the specific variety of bad manager who mistakes loudness for authority and mistakes cruelty for accountability. He yelled. He undermined. He took credit for things his team produced and distributed blame for anything that went wrong with the precision of someone who had been practicing it for years. I had dealt with Dennis for 18 months by the time of the incident, long enough to know exactly how he operated, long enough to be quietly documenting things, but also long enough to still be surprised by the sheer stupidity of what he did that Tuesday. Tuesday afternoon, 5:05 p.m. I was supposed to clock out at 5. I had stayed 5 extra minutes, not because I was gunning for overtime, not because I was trying to show off, but because our largest client, a national retail company I'll call Meridian, had sent an urgent email about a time-sensitive shipment discrepancy, and I had typed a 2-sentence acknowledgement that said we'd look into it first thing in the morning. That was it. 2 sentences. I clocked out at 5:07 and was halfway to my car when Dennis called my cell. He told me to come back inside. I went back inside. He closed his office door and he yelled at me for, and I looked at my watch, 12 minutes straight, about insubordination, about going around the chain of command, about the overtime policy, which he described as absolute and non-negotiable, about the fact that answering emails after hours created liability exposure for the company, about how if I thought I was special enough to set my own hours, I was wrong. And then, the line that sealed everything, he said, "I'm telling you right now, in this office, that if you ever work a single minute of unapproved overtime again, I will terminate you on the spot. Clock out at 5, shut your computer down, and walk out the door. Whatever's happening, not your problem anymore. Not my problem. That's the rule." I looked at him. I took a breath. I said, "Understood. I'll follow that rule exactly." He nodded like that was that. I went home. Now let me tell you what I was thinking on the drive home, because I want to be honest about this. I was not plotting. I was not scheming. I was not sitting in my car, calculating the most devastating way to use this moment. I was mostly just angry and tired and mentally composing a resignation letter I wasn't sure I had the finances to actually send yet. But I also meant exactly what I'd said. I was going to follow that rule. Exactly. To the letter. With the same zero exceptions energy Dennis had used to deliver it. Not as revenge. As compliance. Those two things can look identical from the outside, and that's absolutely not my fault. Wednesday. The next day. The morning was normal. I did my job. I handled everything that came in during business hours with my usual thoroughness. Meridian's shipment discrepancy from the previous evening got resolved. Took me about 45 minutes, done by 11 a.m. Client was happy. I sent a confirmation. All good. At approximately 4:30 p.m., something started developing. Meridian, our single largest client, accounting for somewhere around 30% of our monthly revenue, had a time-critical shipment of retail merchandise that needed to be rerouted due to a weather event affecting the original carrier's hub. This is the kind of thing that happens in logistics, and the reason it doesn't usually become a crisis is that someone stays on top of it in real time, makes calls, coordinates the reroute, keeps the client informed, and keeps the freight moving. That someone was normally me. I began making calls. I was working the problem. It was 4:45, then 4:50. I had a reroute option identified and was in the middle of coordinating confirmation from the alternate carrier. At 4:58 p.m., I looked at the clock. I had 2 minutes. Let me be clear about what was happening in those 2 minutes. I had a solution. I was 90 seconds from executing it. If I had stayed, if I had sent 2 emails and made 1 confirming phone call, the shipment would have been rerouted, Meridian would have been updated, the crisis would have been averted before it became a crisis. But Dennis had made a rule, and Dennis had made that rule in front of witnesses. And Dennis had said no exceptions. At 5 p.m. exactly, I saved nothing. Hice no mayus. I made no phone call. I left the reroute option open on my screen without executing it. I put my phone in my bag. I closed my laptop. I stood up, put on my jacket, said goodnight, everyone, to the general vicinity of my coworkers, and I walked out of that building. My coworker Priya, who had been watching me work the Meridian situation from across the office, texted me at 5:45 p.m. She said, "The Meridian thing is spiraling. Are you coming back in?" I said, "Dennis told me no unapproved overtime." I clocked out at 5. There was a long pause. Then she said, "Jamie." I said, "I followed the rule exactly." Another pause. She sent a single crying laughing emoji. Then, "I cannot. I genuinely cannot." Here is what I know about what happened after I left, assembled from Priya, 2 other colleagues, and eventually the owner himself. Without my reroute coordination, the Meridian shipment missed its transfer window. The alternate carrier option I had identified expired at 6:30 p.m. because nobody was on the phone confirming it. By 8 p.m., Meridian's logistics team was calling the main office line and getting voicemail. By 10 p.m., they were sending formal escalation emails. By midnight, their own operations team had begun emergency sourcing with a competitor carrier. By 7 a.m. the following morning, Meridian had sent a formal notice of contract termination, effective immediately, citing failure to respond during a critical operational window. The contract was worth approximately $4.2 million annually. At 8:45 a.m., the owner, who I'll call Mr. Keaton and who I had met maybe 4 times in 4 years, drove to the office personally. This was unusual enough that people noticed immediately. He asked for a timeline of what had happened. He got the timeline. He asked why the on-duty senior coordinator had not handled the reroute that had been identified before 5 p.m. Priya, bless her, was the one who explained it. She explained about Tuesday's meeting. She had been in the hallway and had heard most of it. Mr. Keaton asked to see Dennis. I wasn't in the building for that conversation. What I know is that at 10:02 a.m., Dennis cleaned out his desk. Mr. Keaton called me directly at 10:15. He apologized. He asked me to come in. He asked me to help with whatever could be salvaged from the Meridian relationship, which wasn't much, but I tried. He also gave me a raise 3 weeks later. I'm still at the company. Dennis is not. Someone asked if I feel guilty about the $4.2 million. No, and I've thought about it. Dennis made a rule. The rule had no exceptions. He delivered it in front of witnesses with explicit threat of termination. I followed it exactly. The consequences of a poorly made rule belong to the person who made it. Someone asked what I would have done if Dennis hadn't made that speech. I would have stayed an extra 15 minutes, fixed the problem, and gone home. Like I had done approximately 300 times before without anyone saying a word. That's the job. That's what I signed up for. That's what I was good at. Dennis made staying impossible. And then he was surprised by what leaving looked like. Some people build their own traps so carefully you'd almost think they meant to. Almost. Dennis made the rule on a Tuesday. He delivered it with a pointed finger and a closed door and 12 minutes of his voice explaining exactly what the consequences would be if Jamie ever deviated from it. He just didn't think through what the rule actually meant in practice. Jamie did. At 5:01 p.m. on Wednesday, with a $4.2 million contract actively on fire and a 90-second solution sitting on a screen, Jamie picked up a bag, closed a laptop, and said goodnight. Not out of spite, out of compliance. Exact, literal, rule-following compliance. And Dennis, who had spent 12 minutes crafting the trap, walked right into it by 10 a.m. the next morning. Some rules protect workers. Some rules protect companies. And some rules, made by people who confuse their volume for their authority, protect absolutely nobody and collapse the moment someone decides to follow them. So, jury, Was Jamie 100% right to follow that rule exactly? Or what does a $4.2 million loss mean? There should have been a different call. And the question I want every single person at a job they've given everything to ask themselves tonight. If your boss made that rule tomorrow, would you follow it the same way? Because Jamie did. And Dennis found out what that costs. Drop your verdict in the comments. Every single one. The floor is completely yours.